Anything to add?
I would move approval.
Okay. Seconder, please.
Price will second it.
Okay. Tom had his hand up, so Warden Marks seconds. All in favor?
Warden Marks,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Kim Smale. Kim Smale,
Kim's still having technical difficulties.
Ray Price,
Yes.
Rob Brom. Rob
You're
Brom,
You're muted, Rob.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes. Motion's carried.
6-1, the motion is carried.
Okay, so we need adoption of the February 24th minutes. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, mover and a
Nope.
seconder.
I'll move the motion.
Rob, seconder. Shy.
I'll second it, Grant.
Rick. Call the vote, please.
Warden Marks,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Kim Smale,
I saw his
Ray
lips.
Price,
Kim, you're
Yes.
still muted for some reason.
Oh, there.
Rob Brom,
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes,
6-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, next is update from the Kettle Creek Conservation Authority regarding the naturalized area. Sally, did you want to do this?
I can if you want.
Go, no, go ahead.
Okay, Grant and I did meet with Jean DeMeo and Betsy McClure, and Jeff Lawrence came at the last moment, and he and Betsy went over again. Looking at the section on the north side of the building, on the west side of the sidewalk that comes out there, trying to do what we would consider a naturalized area, like a pollinator garden or such, and maybe have some pathways through and picnic benches for staff to sit out and have their lunch or whatever. That's what we were looking at. And the concern that we have is one of the silver maples out there is very old. A lot of the limbs have been trimmed off. So Betsy and Jeff feel that we have to deal with that first. Probably the tree will have to be taken down, but they wanted to see how much dead was in the tree. And then they would like to, Betsy would not like to plant it until we determine whether the tree comes down, and then they'll look at how much shade is in the area, what types of plants they would want to plant there. This is just to take away a section that is just grass at the moment with the odd tree. And we're just trying to make it a more environmentally friendly area and a good pollinator area. And Betsy, I did suggest that she go down and look at the Hawkscliff, their special garden that they have there with wildflowers that are good for insects and birds and bees and stuff. So anyway, that's where we are. It won't likely be she won't be able to move forward for at least a couple months. We will obviously have to take it to county council first, but
yeah. Obviously the tree needs to be dealt with, whether it's able to be salvaged or if it's something that needs to be dealt with the chainsaw first. But it looks like a prime area with good visibility from the side street and for public for a possible teaching area or just a demonstration area. So I think there's a lot of possibilities there. it looks promising. Any questions?
Just one, Grant. I got, I know that, I don't know whether it's possible in this situation, but if it was possible to get an agricultural farmer in there at this point to plant beans into it, and then the pollinator garden will mature much, much quicker than trying to go onto the existing canopy that's there. So it just a thought in mind. I don't know whether that's possible or not, but I can work with the Ontario Federation of Agricultural and stuff like that, that they may be a participant into it to be able to help out to do that if it's even possible, and I'm not sure it is.
Yeah, I don't think it is, Rob. It is lawn right now and dispersed trees here and there, mature trees. So I highly doubt it. Just from being a farmer, and it would be very, very small equipment. And,
It would be. I understand that, but the results of going from one stature to another into hard grasses is very, very difficult. And if you actually were able to get some sporadic spraying and beans in there, it would make a vast improvement. That's that's the way people go at it. And yes, small equipment, maybe small rotor tillers or whatever, but it's a way of really getting this to a blooming stage within 3 years, to where the other way it takes a long period of time to actually naturalize it again.
well, it's something we can definitely touch with Betsy when we get closer to a plan. Sally, do you have?
I was just going to say, one of the things they did down at Hawks Cliff is they made raised beds for some of these pollinator plants, etc., with trails between them and benches, etc. And they encourage people to save the seeds. I don't know if any of you have been down there, but like they have butterfly bush, and it tells you all about it, and it tells you when the seeds are going to be ripe and how to collect them, how to plant them. And they encourage people to do that. So Betsy said she was going to go down and have a look at it. I don't know how well it's been kept up during COVID. That's the only problem. I know it was beautiful 2 years ago, but I'm not sure what happened with COVID. But that was another idea. And Rob, the biggest problem is there are at least 5 trees there. I agree, maybe rototillers or something of that nature, but there are 5 or 3 mature trees and 2 smaller trees in this area.
Yeah, you definitely want to stay away from them, obviously, but like I say, I'd have to take a look at the property. I just know that that's an easier bridge to get an accomplishment, and an accomplishment will bring value as to public awareness.
Yep. Well, that's great. Any other questions? See none. Thanks, Sally. Sarah Emmons, she sent her regrets. This month is kidding season for the goat herd, and she's been a little busy with the goats, and she has done a little bit of work, but she said she'll get back at it. She only has a couple left to kid out in the next couple of days, so April looks a whole lot better for Sarah. Next, we have 2 staff members here, Brian Lima and Nancy Pizzano. Brian's our Director of Engineering Services, and Brian's first up with a discussion about roadside environments. Brian, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. For you, which I trust was distributed, is a copy of a staff report presented before Council last year as it pertains to roadside environments. A discussion before Council with respect to the efforts of this committee as well, as it pertains to options and possibilities and requirements associated with allowing our roadside environments to naturalize. So briefly going through the report. So the county, through our road maintenance agreement and with the operational support of our municipal partners, undertakes roadside maintenance primarily to maintain sightlines and ensure drainage facilities function as designed. Based on experience from our member municipalities, some vegetation control obligations have been difficult for municipalities to complete. Historically, vegetation control within the county's right-of-way has been completed with 2 cuts, spring and fall each year. In addition, vegetation around guide rails and in the vicinity of intersections is also cut to uncover roadside hazards and maintain sight lines. In addition, the road maintenance agreement requires municipalities to cut, control vegetation entirely within the county's right-of-way, so property line to property line, at least once every 3 years. The focus there has been the control of larger vegetation, such as trees that creep into the county's right-of-way over time, as well as noxious and invasive weeds. And again, historically, point to be made there, efforts to control those efforts or to control those items have been addressed through cutting. However, based on experience from our municipal partners, municipal staff have cited difficulty in achieving that intent due to roadside topography, the need for specialized equipment in some cases, and oftentimes difficulty in securing contractors to complete the cutting. Not all municipalities undertake that work in-house. As a result of ongoing discussions that county staff have with our member municipal partners and based on recommendations through those discussions, municipalities with the support of council were recently afforded the opportunity to address vegetation control in a slightly different manner. Number one, first and foremost, emphasizing the requirement to maintain vegetation control along the county's roadside for a minimum requirement. So edge of road was a requirement, and at intersections around guide rails, as previously mentioned. But when you have the balance of the county right-of-way still to contend with, discussion amongst municipal staff and with their support and agreement, the county is taking more of a naturalized approach and allowing that growth to occur. However, at the same time, still emphasizing the need to control invasive and noxious weeds. And so the county's spray policy is also included in the staff report and is not a new policy. Something that has existed. It is not an active program per se. It varies with respect to involvement from municipality to municipality, but it is something that, short of mechanical intervention, is another alternative. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Brian. Any questions for Brian?
I've got a couple here. So I understand that exactly what you've said, and then there's the 2 rows in the spring, and there's 1 in the fall, correct? Cuts. So you have 3.6 hectares for 2 times in the spring, and then 1 in the fall at an identified, I can't remember what the actual 3.633 of the brushes and stuff like that. So I understand all that stuff, and I understand why you guys are doing that. But in the case that where we've got the vegetation controls within the county row has been completed, oh, that's the 2 cuts. So there is a clause in there that we got in this scenario. Municipalities are further obligated to eradicate invasive and noxious weeds, either mechanically or by adhering to the county's approved herbicide spray policy. So you've got an avenue right now in the Phragmites that is growing rapidly onto some of these roads that we could possibly use that avenue to start to do the pollinator habitat on those particular areas, because that's exactly what they did in Bayham. So they'd use that policy that was already integrated into the systems to work with it, rather than the other way around. I understand trying to put it on every side of the road is never going to happen, but it could not happen because of it has to be placed strategically into an area, and it has to have enough of a grip to take control of the area rather than completely get dominated. So you've got to do it in fairly large sections. And there definitely are some sections of Phragmites that we could use to be able to go at this. The funding is there, and there is like the funding or the aspect of being able to perform it is there already. So that I find interesting, and that would be the way that we could possibly go at it to be able to increase the pollinator habitat and our natural environment. There are a couple of things here too that I know that everybody knows that now that the federal government has got the carbon tax credit coming through. Well, with carbon taxes, there's also a credit of carbon. You get credits for carbon tax credit. And in this situation, we could likely apply for a carbon tax credit, maybe along the sides of the roads, to be able to start to increase pollinator habitat. I'm not sure, but the storage of prairies is significant. So it gives us another aspect to look at down the road. But focusing on the Phragmites, it's a possibility of being able to get some small plot up in a relatively short period of time. So and the other thing is that a lot of people think that like these cuttings here are all, there's the 3 sets of cuts. I think Southwold did 2 sets of cuts, which was significant. And we're losing the battle on the Phragmites. If we could convert one of those cuts over to total Phragmites control, just more or less diverting the staff that we have into a more focused aspect of the Phragmites, then we might have a little bit better results from there as well. So that's my ploy at it right now. And like I said, I would be happy to, I think that it's imperative that we actually work with the agricultural group that's next to these sites of Phragmites too, because even if you sprayed it on the road and then there's a section in the agricultural field that's, or on the ditches in the side, it's never going to work as well. That Phragmites will definitely take back and go at it again. So there's nothing that's going to stop it really, other than sumac, which is shades it out a bit. So there's, you've got a defense mechanism against Phragmites. So there are other avenues at it, but that's how I see it going. I can't reinvent the wheel. I understand that, but here's an option that we can use to possibly get something done.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly good point, Rob. And one thing I did not note in my report is, and it's really forms part of a separate report, as well as effort by council and directive by council, is actually last year was the first year in which the county implemented its Phragmites program. So last year was the first year. I'm not sure if you or the committee was aware of that, but last year was the first year in which we retained a third-party service contractor who went out, sprayed all the Phragmites patches solely within the county's road allowance. Your point with respect to patches extending onto private properties is a point well taken, and you know, there is some involvement with respect to private property owners to assist us in controlling that, but as it pertains to the county's road allowance, you know, again, we've completed year 1 of that FRANG application, and ongoing efforts as required will be applied to ensure that we continue to control that or eradicate that growth as we move forward. So.
Okay, great.
Grant?
Any other, go ahead, Sally.
Yeah, I was just gonna, Brian, I didn't know if you have ever looked at the policies of Norfolk County, because their roadsides are quite different from our roadsides, and there's far more naturalization along theirs. And it just, I know we've been dealing with the Phragmites for 3 years in Central Elgin, and have done, you know, we've in most areas, except for, as Rob said, where farmers have it along there, the marsh extends into their land, and then it's very difficult. But I know we have to stay on top of it. But I just, you know, the one thing I would also comment on that I wish somehow as a county we could discourage is the use of that buzzsaw thing on a farm that goes along just literally slaughtering the limbs off trees. It doesn't cut them, it just smashes them off. And I didn't know what your thoughts are on those. I know they eventually recover, but a lot of the trees do die as well. And it really does seem pretty drastic measure.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair to Councillor Martin. I guess starting at the beginning, we certainly did reach out to various local county neighbors and local municipalities to get their feedback on and get a sense of what others are doing. So we did in fact reach out to Lanark County to get a sense of some of the creative things that they're doing, and they're doing some great work, as Rob has certainly noted in past. We did reach out to Norfolk. We reached out to others around us as well. Based on past practice and the opportunities that municipalities now have before them, we truly do believe at a county staff level that the tools and opportunity exists to allow our roadside environments to naturalize as they will in due time, subject to any additional efforts made in that regard to do so. So whether that's additional, seed planting, whatever the case may be, it's just a function that in due time that they will naturalize, and so that has reduced the operational intervention of our municipal partners, and they've all welcomed that certainly. As it pertains to the larger tree canopy growth and reference to the mechanical means and the way in which they're doing it, certainly happy to have some discussion with our member municipalities in that regard. We certainly don't restrict the means with which they aim or achieve that outcome. I know the mechanical equipment that you're referring to, and will agree that it can be quite aggressive, and it may have a lasting impact on the trees to which it is cutting. So we're happy to have that discussion, but ultimately it is left to the member municipalities to decide how best to adhere to that agreement requirement. But we'll happily have that discussion.
Thank you.
I guess from my point of view, and I would have to admit that Southold is one of those member municipalities that is using a fill cutter system and just finished up. So I guess I talked to my road superintendent about it, and it comes down to manpower and cost efficiency. And if you don't use a mechanical device such as that flail system, then you're down to manpower and chainsaws, and some of the limbs are too high, so they'd have to have some sort of man lift to cut the limbs for sight lines, and it becomes cost prohibitive. And I guess that's something we all have to wrestle with, cost versus what the outcome, I guess, is. And something that I guess we all as municipal partners need to wrestle with and come to some sort of consensus on how we operate. Because for Southold, with a small manpower during the winter when we're doing road maintenance as well, it's pretty tough to do. And you can't, unless you start hiring more people specifically to do this, it's going to be a challenge.
Grant, there's one thing about that, like we're talking about the tree and the canopies mostly, but like 95% of this is removal of shrubs. And what happens with the shrub is that these types of shrubs like sumac, like you can cut them off and they're going to sprout and keep going. Like they're not going to stop. So what you're doing is you're implementing cash into something. 90% of your cash is going into trying to control sumac, or there's subsequent shrubs just like that grow up very quickly, but they're all, just by cutting them off, they just sprout another thing and they go up another 3-4 feet. So we got to concentrate on what we can. And in most of those cases, if you really want to kill those shrubs, you got to use an herbicide on them. So you got to cut them off, and then you have to put an herbicide across them, and that's how you would clear out those types of areas. But I see it as we're concentrating on an area and we're cutting it, but the next year it's the same way. So you got a 3-foot sumac in a couple of years. So it's I see you cutting it down, but it's just going to keep increasing. So I'm not sure what the solution is, but. You're muted.
I agree. I guess it's a discussion with Brian, the road superintendents from across the county, to see if there's a solution. But obviously, some of it is getting the native species back in along those far reaches of the road allowance, and hopefully
Right,
that
like
solve the
determining
issue.
what species are, and then going at those types of items, like I don't know. There's the buckthorn is all over the place, right? Now it's moving into the ditches too, of controlling that sort of thing. But again, these are tough items because they are invasive and they just don't go away very quickly. So your way that we have to think about it is, how do we eradicate it so that it's gone, so that we don't have to continuously keep on putting in more money, and then increase our budgets, and we still got nothing left in the end of it. But
Well, I know the conservation authorities are dealing with this on their properties. Kettle Creek, for certain, has a person involved with the eradication of invasive species on their properties, and maybe that's something that I can get Kettle Creek or one of the other conservation authorities to give their thoughts on how they're dealing with it and the programs that seem to be working better in the future. Anyway, good discussion. Thanks, Brian. I'm sure we'll have you back at some point for further discussions. Did you have any thoughts on that silver maple tree while we're there? I should have asked you beforehand with on the north side of the line.
Yeah, we're happy to have an arborist review its health and provide comment back. That's fine.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Okay,
Grant, I've got a question for Brian, if it's okay.
sure, go ahead.
Brian, in relation to the ditches on the side of the highway, in relation to garbage, are you responsible for that?
Through Mr. Chairs, to Mr. Price, that responsibility relies with our member municipalities. So if there's something of concern in that regard along County Road, I mean, by all means, feel free to bring that to my attention, and I'll make sure that message is transferred to the appropriate municipality.
No, I was just thinking, I've been calling around to other municipalities in Southwest Ontario, and some of them have implemented, how can I put it, a local volunteer pickup for the garbage in the ditches. I just wondered if that was feasible in our area.
Yeah, through Mr. Chair, through our review of with respect to roadside environments and what other counties and municipalities do, there are many municipal jurisdictions out there that offer adopt the highway type programs, whereby volunteers may come forth, express an interest in maintaining a section of road. And specifically focused on, one of many efforts, one of which being picking up of garbage at their convenience at certain times of year. So at the present time, Elgin County doesn't have such a program in place, but we'd be happy to explore opportunities in that regard. There will be, it's important to note, there will be requirements for volunteers to do that, and that's a discussion that we'll have to have with our risk management team and county solicitor in that regard with respect to insurance and so on and so forth. There's likely also going to be personal protective equipment requirements that would have to adhere to the Occupational Health and Safety Act as well. So, certainly something we can look at, but to directly address your inquiry, we don't have anything specific, any specific program at this time.
Brian, just so you're aware, we used to have, we had Golden K did Highway 4, Sunset Road, and still in Central Elgin have quite a few volunteer groups that do roads. They leave the bags on the side of the road and our garbage people pick them up. But the county went away from endorsing it for liability reasons. So they're not stopping people doing it, but we were told, and Grant will remember that as well, that they were not going to ask, they didn't want to register people for certain roads and do it because of the liability. But it's certainly, and they said that they couldn't promote it because of the liability. Now, I don't know, how we get around that, but certainly we do have some people that still go along Fairview Ave, which is a county road. We have a volunteer group that does that road every year, and Central Elgin picks the garbage up after they're done. We have quite a few of them like that, but I do know the county went away from sponsoring or encouraging it.
Yeah, that was 5 or 6 years ago. I remember that discussion, and it wasn't that popular, but
No.
liability always trumps everything, it seems, anymore.
So two things on that. The Bayham group has developed a policy for that, and I don't know exactly the details of it, but that's part of what they said in their documentation, that they did have to develop it because of the parsnip, and they wanted people to go around and do hand spraying and take care of it, and volunteer groups to manage stuff, and they developed a program for that to be acceptable with the county anyway. So that's one thing. The other thing I missed off on was that hydro seeding now. So any areas that are redistributed, and like stream beds and ditches and stuff like that, to where we use hydro seed, there is a pollinator mix that can go into those hydro seeds so that they actually become a little bit more viable than just the grass seeds in there. So if we could keep that in mind, that maybe new areas that where we're using that product already, that we could put seeds in there of like hardy pollinator species, then we can start it up on just even the hydro seeding that goes around the new areas that we're implementing.
Okay. Great discussion. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to our next report. Welcome Nancy Posado from Elgin County Planning. The floor is yours, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jones. Good morning, everyone. So as Councillor Jones mentioned, my name is Nancy Posado, and I'm the Manager of Planning for the County of Elgin. A lot of you probably don't know me at all, and I actually just started at the county last year in June, so I'm pretty new to this role. So as you may have heard, the county is launching an official plan review process, and we wanted to reach out to some of those key stakeholders as part of this process. So part of this presentation is leading a discussion about the Environment Committee's responses to some of the stakeholder questions that we have about our official plan. And also, I thought we could take this opportunity to kind of go over some of the background in the county, and also respond to some of the questions that I think were raised at the last Environmental Committee meeting. So we'll just take it slide by slide, I guess. So very briefly, I'm not sure the background that the Environment Committee has about land use planning and environmental policy in Ontario, but I thought I'd just go over some of the key highlight some of the key documents at this time. So the Planning Act gives the authority under the provincial policy statement to provide sort of a general broad land use planning goals and policies that are to be applied at the local levels. And some of those broad policies include information and policies about natural heritage, water conservation, protection, natural hazards, and something that's new based on the new provincial policy statement from 2020 is the notion of climate change and incorporating that into local policies. From that, we have the county official plan, which is to reflect the broad policy statements from the PPS, but they contain more detailed policies on natural heritage features, the notion of determining the significance, environmental impact studies, which are very important to provide in order to assess significance of features and mitigation buffers, things like that, as well as water resources and natural hazards. From there as well, we have our local official plans, which are all of our member municipalities. And much like the county, they have a lot of the same policies related to natural heritage natural hazards, but they usually have a little bit more detail. And in fact, a lot of them also include mapping on hazard lands or floodplains and those sorts of additional information. Other documents that are also used throughout the various processes are generally ones that were produced by the provincial government over the years, such as the Natural Heritage Reference Manual, the Ontario Wetland Evaluation System, Significant Wildlife Habitat Technical Guide. Those sorts of things are also used when determining significance. And then there's the actual role of the conservation authorities. So they have a specific mandate, and in fact, that just was redefined, I guess you could say, through the Conservation Authorities Act that just was amended, I believe it was end of last year, early this year. And that defines the role of the conservation authorities to specific areas such as wetlands, stormwater management, source water protection, hazards, and any erosions. Next slide. As you also might be aware of, as part of the 2013 county official plan, there was a policy that was included that that the county would look at establishing a natural heritage system that would be considered at the time of the next official plan review. So as part of that, the county undertook the Elgin Natural Heritage Study, System Study, sorry, and that was completed in 2019, the draft. And that evaluates the existing ecologically important terrestrial land resources of the county based on 2015 aerial photography and using scientific methods and geographic information system modeling. So that basically took a landscape level view of various features and determined significance based on size criteria, all sorts of different things, but at a landscape level. And then a series of maps were also produced as part of that draft natural heritage study, which identified the features and for protection. Next slide. So now we'll move into kind of the discussion that I was hoping to lead today. So as you know, the official plan review, it happens every 5 years. And right now the county has just started that process of undertaking the review. And obviously the Environment Committee was identified as one of those key stakeholders with respect to providing some comment on the current official plan. So what we've done is we've come up with a discussion guide to help lead discussions with stakeholders with respect to the current official plan. You know, what's working, what's not working, does there need to be different focus, those sorts of questions. So if we can today, we'll go through these questions, and I'd love to get some feedback from the perspective of the Environment Committee in terms of their mandate and what you think is significant or important for me to be aware of. So the very first question is, so what is the mandate of your organization? So in your own words, what do you, I know that there is a mandate certainly for the committee, but what as well from you members, what do you think your mandate is with respect to the Environment Committee?
Who wants to go first? Okay, well, I guess from my perspective, it's just to forward recommendations on to County Council as pertaining to our environment and what we could add to the official plan to help our environment in the future.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So I can go a while here.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sally.
I was just going to say, I would also see that one of the things we're trying to do is help the county become more adaptive to climate change and assist with reducing our impact on the environment. That, to me, those were goals of this committee, to make Elgin very responsible in its actions and whatever it does, and protect the areas we have, as well as hopefully reestablishing some areas that will help with alleviate, you know, the carbon. Do we need some carbon sequestration, etc.? So I'm going to let Rob go ahead.
I went back right to our committee mandate that I looked at, and I went through it, and it's got to serve the advisory resource for information support groups, to rural initiatives and planning advisory committee, municipal councils and committees as required. But it goes into to what we're doing here, and it's citizens to encourage to promote sustainable programs and functions such as water reduction, reuse, recycle programs, water, energy, conservation measures. And the last point there is climate change mitigation. To me, like all the rest of this stuff, no matter what you do, we're not going to be able to make a significant difference to our habitat. And I think all of us here are starting to realize that. Like, you can put as many straws as you want into paper, but it's not going to make a substantial difference. What we need right now is a climate change mitigation, and what they're asking for is a action plan that is a nature-based system. So that means that we use our waterways and our creeks and our valleys to the best of their ability to make them the best that they can be to sustain our environment, because the state that is in right now is not good at all. And if we don't do something within 10 years to get this turned around, there's going to be multiple species that are at risk here that are going to be gone out of Elgin County. So now's the time that we need action. And I think that, like, you can put everything together, but my point of view is just trying to use these nature-based systems, which I went through a bunch of them in my last report last week, and I don't know whether you've had a chance to review it or not, but those systems are what we need to try to promote into Elgin County.
Okay, great.
So that would be my man, is by a climate action plan using nature-based systems.
Excellent. Okay, so if there's nothing else on that point, then we'll move on to question 2. What role does your organization play? How is your organization affected by development?
Well, obviously, from a municipal partner standpoint and county standpoint, Elgin County in general is seeing a huge push on development, and developers are very pushy, to say the least, very aggressive. And it's a matter of trying to come to some sort of a consensus with developers with what they do. Obviously, they're trying to get as much big bang for their buck as they can possibly get after you spend a lot of money on a piece of property. But it's a matter of not being reckless about how they go about their business and where our waterways are affected, because normally they want to build right along waterways and ravines, and they want to get as close as possible. And it is very difficult to keep that in the forefront of their thoughts. So I'm sure you see that all the time, Nancy, where they really like to push the envelope as much as they can. So it's something I think it needs to be a little bit more stringent in our official plans, the county and this lower tier, to make it a more effective and an easier route for the planning process. That there are some a little bit more restrictive on how development happens.
That's what national study is so important to, Grant, to show where there are areas that we must preserve, and then as a committee, maybe helping, so when developers come in, they need, they like ravine lots, etc. Sure, people do, but they have to be kept well enough away from ravines. If they like them, they can't destroy them. I mean, we need to preserve natural heritage areas for when development it does occur. But we also need to make sure that when farmland and other things in development has to be very well planned. And I would encourage somehow, maybe in our official plan, that developers also need to put in some naturalized areas, not just preserve the ones that are there, but perhaps add some naturalized areas, because people want to live near a naturalized area. The stormwater management ponds have as some help that way, but there are other ways of managing water that you can put naturalized areas in. And it's important to emphasize that I know we've had problems in people trying to mow up to the edge of the storm instead of leaving it natural as agreed.
You're breaking up a bit, Sally. Your connection's starting to disintegrate. We caught most of it, but not all of it.
I'll cut off the video.
I think we got what you're saying, though.
Okay.
I did, yeah, sorry, I did hear, sorry, Sally, I did hear, through you, Mr. Chair, Sally, I did hear, through the official plan, looking at naturalized areas above and beyond, not just protecting, but also, enhancing, I guess is the term I would use, natural heritage features. And so utilizing things like swim ponds, but also managing the water and, resources and naturalizing areas as well. Is that correct, Sally? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Thanks.
I agree with Sal. I think that that's the key there. And there's a couple of things that are interesting here. And like the one would be, we'll go to Shedden for a second, and the development that they have on the other side of the road there, or that they just sold off the 9 lots. There was no developer there. Okay, so in that position, the county or the township purchased a piece of property, subdivided it into several things, and then sold those pieces of property off to individuals. So there's a big gain in that area there, and there's no reason why we can't possibly do that in other areas too. And then we're not bullied by the developers. They can get a developer in there, but the other thing about using developers is that right now that development is in 5% of green space, and green space a minimum of 5%. There's no way that we should allow subdivisions to go in with a 5% green space and absolutely zero natural heritage in there. So I think that area definitely needs to be improved, and I think that the area that I would love to see is that for every house that goes up, there's a certain amount of naturalized habitat that goes there. And when they're going close to ravines, should be a buffer zone of natural area that goes there. So that it's going to push those houses back by a half an acre, or, a half an acre is not very much, but it gives it a chance for that. It completely destroys a ravine when you build houses all next to it. There's not much that can survive into the ravine itself. So you've got to have a little bit of habitat on the outsides of those things. So if we could develop ways of being able to implement more natural heritage, especially when there's a ravine into effect, and that becomes a walking trail, and it becomes a beautiful area for the whole community to use. And it also serves as a carbon neutral for that subdivision. So I think that we need to put the pressure back and rediscover ways of being able to do this, because 5% in going into agricultural areas, and that's why they're it's not so much the natural areas, but to me, I would rather see a subdivision go right around the whole ravine, providing it goes with 1/3 of an acre to 1 acre of natural habitat. And then that becomes like some other subdivisions are. So I think that that's the way that we've got to go at it. And, as far as the developers go, we can, like what Shedden has just done it. So it should be able to be done to where that the township can acquire properties. And like all trailer parks, all the utilities are central located. So if we could get into an eco-housing developments around streams, wooded lots, provincially significant wetlands, and develop those things for eco-housing, they'd have to be totally sustainable and movable. But there's some new things out there all the time that are coming on. But I'll stop at that. But that's where I think that we need to really work on to. We've got to increase the amount of natural habitat for every house that is put up, and it can't be 5%. And that's slides and other items have green space that they consider green space.
Mm-hmm. Through you, Mr. Chair, that 5% that you're talking about, that's the Planning Act with respect to park dedication. Is that what you're referring to? Or
yeah, minimum 5%.
Yeah, just through you, Mr. Chair, the government actually changed the provisions with respect to parkland dedication. There used to be alternative ways of obtaining lands for parkland use. And then they removed a lot of those, and it became this really complicated process. But anyways, it looks like they're going back to just the straight 5%. And if there's any alternatives to that, it has to be developed through a bylaw that can be appealed then by developers or what have you. But the 5% has been around for a very, very long time. And it's not just natural heritage. I think natural heritage can be a component of that, but really 5% is in relation to parkland, which can be active and passive parkland space. So in that consideration of only 5%, it generally could also just be active parkland, in which case then there's no natural heritage considerations as
Correct.
part of that. So that's just something that I'm aware of dealing with subdivisions over time. So. But
Correct.
I'll make some notes about additional naturalized areas, and if there's the potential to add something like that.
I would agree with Rob that especially in subdivision agreements, that it seems if you put the lot line right back to the top of a ravine or whatever, people will take the advantage. They'll either throw stuff over the fence or whatever they are, or they'll go down and do work on their own down in the. So I think that has to be, any agreements has to be maybe a bit more detail put into them to protect the surrounding area.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that comment. Something that I know that I'm not really sure how Elgin deals with over time is subdivisions themselves and these ravine features, if they're continue to be under separate ownership, under private ownership, or if they end up becoming a component of the local municipality. I don't think that's utilized very much. I think very much so these significant features usually stay in private ownership. So if that's the case, then obviously there's some particulars with that, and being able to maintain and enforcing any things being thrown in there, for instance, those sorts of things. So that's a consideration. But also with respect to ravines and setbacks, I think we do rely on the conservation authorities to also, they do have their own bylaws with relation to significant ravines, erosion hazards, those sorts of things. So there's setbacks that are to be maintained for development to ensure that erosion and those sorts of items are not
That was the key word, though.
in subdivision. Sorry?
That was the key word, significant, right? So a lot of these things are not significant. So again, you get, that's why we have no protection there.
Right. So what you're saying is, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Nancy. Just so you know, Central Elgin, with a lot of the subdivisions that we have had, we have taken over the ravine lands, and the storm management ponds, obviously, over those areas, but for a lot of ravine lands, certainly in Port Stanley, when subdivisions went in to protect them.
Okay, great.
For you. Great.
Yeah. I think there's different municipalities that do different things though too. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in terms of even just going back to manpower, when Central Elgin possibly can own these types of lands because they can maintain and ensure they're maintained, but some of the other lower tiers may not have the ability to maintain those types of lands. So they may shy away from owning them or being responsible for them. So okay, great. So if there's nothing else on that point, I think we've also covered question 3, which was, what is your organization's position on development in the County of Elgin? I've heard a lot of other considerations for subdivision development, for instance. Is there anything else on that point, or should I move on to question 4?
I think we've hit that one pretty hard.
Yeah,
Yep.
I agree. Okay, so we'll go on to question 4 then. What, if any, legislation or policy changes have occurred since the last official plan in 2013 related to your service or area? So are there any key pieces of legislation that you would like me to be aware of that maybe I'm not aware of, or that you would like to have specific focus on?
From my perspective, I can't think of anything. Obviously, Central Elgin and Southwold, when we done our official plan 5 years ago, had to adopt the natural heritage feature. So that's already in our plans. Obviously, it'll be updated this coming year, but from my perspective, I think that was the only thing significant from Southold.
The other thing would be the changes to the Conservation Authorities Act, I think is very much going to affect things. Certainly Kim could even speak to that, but I'm very concerned with the things that they've taken away from the conservation authorities who've been protecting a lot of the natural heritage areas.
I was going to say, with the provincial policy statements and the changes, I don't know whether, well, the committee's probably aware of some of the new responsibilities that the province has where they can come in and override the conservation authority. And that has happened recently down near Oshawa, where there was a developer wanted to go in and develop a class 1 wetland, I think it was. And the Toronto Region Conservation Authority objected to it. But then the province came in and said, yeah, we'll give you a permit with a few conditions on it. So you should be very aware that they have the authority now to override what the conservation authority says.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think what you're discussing is the notion of these development the minister zoning orders, sorry, that's what they're called. And we haven't seen them very much in Elgin. In fact, I'm not aware of any that have happened within Elgin County, but I know that they are utilized quite a bit in the GTA. And as you mentioned, it means that the province can, depending on if they consider the development basically to be in the public's interest, whether it be affordable housing or something to that effect, they can override essentially and issue a zoning order to allow for the development to occur with some conditions or caveats on that. But it complicates matters certainly for certain issues. So
it is not just for benefit to the things that Dufferin wetlands. They were looking at a warehouse for Amazon, but Amazon has backed off because of the big uproar about it, so that they're not proceeding with that. But the province had overridden the Conservation Authorities Act there and said no, they could develop that marshland for a warehouse.
That's pretty sad, actually.
Yeah.
I guess I got to take a little bit of a grain of salt on what everything's saying. I have not seen the actual property that they actually were going to in Oshawa, that it was a class 1. I'm not sure about whether it was a class 1 or not. I don't know. I haven't been able to pull that up and do some investigation into it. But I can say that some of the things that that we need to look at here is that how do I the part of the problem is that the environmental studies are getting so crazy that it becomes impossible to do things. And then things like the Dalewood Bridge, St. Thomas, the environmental study on that was, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to get this done. So I think the government is implementing things to be able to streamline these things. It's been used, I believe, 15 times by the Liberal governments in 3 years, and 37 times or 34 times that this policy has been used by the PCs. So I know that it's a struggle. I don't really understand it 100% myself, but I do realize that costs are escalating, and sometimes it needs to be more of a blend rather than a no or a go situation. And sometimes it's so hard to get something through. And trust me, I'm one of the biggest naturalists around and hate all these things, but I always look at it objectively and start to look like all that money that's gone into environmental studies could actually be transferred to habitat rehabilitation. We wouldn't have a problem. We're dousing ourselves with so much things that we just can't get anything through anymore. It's a thing with what we're doing right here, or we're talking about. So I take it with a grain of salt. That's my point. Now, one thing I wanted to say about the legislation policy changes, I would definitely like to look at the woodlots, because the woodlots are in real bad condition right now. And I don't think there's any changes that have been done to the forestry acts in our area. And to me, that any tree is over 50 years old right now in Elgin County should be preserved for raptor habitat, because it's the only place that they can go into it. So to me, it's important to start to save the mature trees. If there's a mature tree over 50 years old in this, there's not many of them left anymore, is what I'm saying. So to me, I would try to enhance certain things and rebuild. If you go into a wood lot, you can't just strip everything out of it. You've got to leave something there for animals and creatures and dead trees to be able to live. So I would like to get the wood lots a little bit. So
Okay. Thank
Trees,
you.
we need to leave seed trees as well. Shouldn't be allowed to cut all the mature trees.
no, they shouldn't be.
So that's a good point to make. Through you, Mr. Chair, that's a good point to make. There's also the county's woodlands conservation bylaw, which also requires that if there's any trees cut down as per that, then there needs to be, if there's a deficit, then there needs to be a compensation for that. So we can look at that woodlands conservation bylaw as well with respect to sort of that one for one.
I would agree. It's something that I think Sally's been pushing for several years, is to update the woodlands bylaw. It is time for a look at it. It's been quite a while since it was implemented. And it's definitely concerning, some of the things I'm seeing happening lately, and it needs more teeth, put it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So if we're good with question 4, then we'll move on to question 5. What is your vision for the county of Elgin?
Who wants to start? I think our motto says it all: progressive by nature. I think we need to be a leader in our environmental issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyone else?
Would be the county has 450 full and part-time employees. And my vision would be able to turn in whatever Parks and Rec, or call it maintenance of management of the environment, or a new category to be able to be implemented in there, to be able to redirect some of the people that we have over into these areas. And it's just like the roadsides. We're not going to get rid of people. We're going to transfer them into a new era. And that's what we need to do over the next 10 years. That's my vision.
Anyone else? No? Okay, so great. We'll move on to question 6. What do you want the Elgin County official plan to prioritize over the next 5 to 10 years? So specific to the policies related to the official plan, what's in there right now, if anyone's kind of been able to review them. There's obviously lots of policies related to all the various components of the natural heritage system. Is there anything that needs to be prioritized from that perspective or overall?
Anybody?
Just one thing, just Nancy, one thing I would say is the woodlands bylaw at the moment allows sometimes clearing of areas and then replacement with trees. And we found that's a major concern, because the replacements don't work very well, and they don't, and we've ended up in lawsuits trying to pursue those. I don't think we should allow any clearing of woodlots personally. It probably won't go, but that's my feeling.
Okay.
Well, at this state, there's some woodlots that are totally devastated by emerald ash. And again, you got to be able to give and take here. So to me, it's like, I love your idea, but I don't think it's going to grab a whole lot of substance. I think that we have to be able to work with the groups that we have to come with more of a soluble solution to these things. So it's interesting, but so we were on 7, right? 6 or 7?
We're on 6.
On 6.
So something to be prioritized over the next 5 to 10 years. The official plan, I have gone through that official plan, but it was like a year and a half ago, and I tried to pull it up again this time and start to read it, but it's just, there's a lot there. So as to prioritize, I think we've talked about what our prioritize items would be into the future here for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, great. Anyone else on that question?
One thing I would like to add is kind of a sore subject, I guess, is what's happened with the shoreline management stuff, the hazard lands.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I don't have a lot of background on the shoreline management plan, but I am aware that 2 of the conservation authorities, I believe, have adopted the shoreline management plan for their own practices, and 2 have not. They were looking for additional considerations, I guess you could say. And I'm not aware of any local municipalities that have adopted it. And as well, the county has not adopted it as part of their process for review. So we, at this point, we look to the conservation authorities with respect to any shoreline management, and it's part of their mandate with respect to floodplain and erosion hazard and that sort of thing. So we really rely on our conservation authorities to let us know when there's issues or development adjacent to that sort of thing. So I think from that perspective, that's where we're at. We haven't adopted it as a document.
It's
Just so you're aware, Nancy, Kim sat on that, and I was near the end, but the county were the ones who commissioned that to be done so that we could have one complete, one coordinated plan for the whole of the shoreline. And I mean, the county helped pay for that and do it, and then they just backed off because there was flack from some people. So I just, I mean, Catfish approved it, and then they turned around and some of them disapproved it. So it's not.
It's
So sort of in limbo.
It's very disappointing from my standpoint because I was sitting on Lower Thames at that point, and now I chair Kettle Creek. So I've seen 2 conservation authorities. Both of those conservation authorities approved it. And if I'm not mistaken, Nancy, I think Southwell did approve it, but I'm not positive on that.
Neither am I. Okay.
With regards to other municipalities, I'm not sure of. I know there was a huge push from a small, very vocal group that's still in existence and makes life miserable from Kettle Creek's point of view anyway in Lower Thames, but I'll leave it at that. But it's something that, and that's the problem when and the province has probably done the worst thing possible with authorities is now they have to be political appointments and not just and really they don't want to see public appointments on behalf of municipalities. And when it becomes political, anything can happen with the amount of, you put enough of pressure on. I see other boards where they want to push towards more of a technical appointments where people actually have knowledge of what they're doing, and that probably would have been a better route for the province other than it would have taken the municipal rate out of it, which sometimes is not a bad thing, but it's difficult. It's a good plan by one of the most reputable companies in North America that did the plan, but it's being disputed on a regular basis, which is really asinine when the same company does work for the province and for the feds as well. So it's one of those political ones that really got out of hand.
It's just something to be aware of because I'm not saying it should be a priority, but I think these groups, as you go through the review process, they may try to make it a priority. So
Okay, great.
Can we have that published by any chance, that report? Because I've never seen it and I'd like to brief through it if it's possible.
I believe it's available from sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it's available from the Conservation Authority's website, specifically KCCA, I think has it listed. So you probably would be able to find it there.
All right, cool. And what's the name of the report?
I believe it's called the Elgin County Shoreline Management Plan.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll go on to question 7 then, if there's nothing else. We've kind of gone over this as well, so we might be able to breeze through it, but what sections of the current official plan would you like to discuss? And which provisions are critical to maintain, and are there any areas of concern? So I obviously heard from past items, the woodlands and consideration on the woodlands themselves. Let me just see here. Is there anything else that, any areas of concern?
I think
Overall climate change, obviously.
climate change and new development, residential development, I guess, per se.
Streams and ditches setbacks. That's something that I would like to, is a concern.
So drains and ditches and setbacks, drains and ditches.
Drainage ditches setbacks. A lot of these setbacks and even road setbacks right now, you're seeing a lot of agricultural groups. I don't mean to beat on guys, but you see them within 3 feet of the roads in certain areas right now. So maybe the idea is that we should just go with them and let them go ahead and plant right up to the roads, and then we've got no maintenance on the road. So, but in turn, we could get it put back to significant habitat around areas and promote that back to the farmers to be able to do it. So I think there's got to be some give and take in there, but I like I say, you see one thing happen, and let's face it, if the agricultural groups went right up to the roadsides or within 6 feet of the roadsides, we wouldn't have a problem with we could save all this cash. So implement it back into something that matters. Sustainability.
The only thing there, Rob, is it does affect the drainage greatly when agriculture goes right up into that area. And that I know is a concern for the roads people as far as drainage.
Yeah, you're right. For sure. The drains have to be maintained, but like we know, there's a lot of them that are flat roads and there's no drainage there, and they're providing the drainage as well. So it's all taken care of.
Okay. So if there's nothing else on question 7, I'll move on to question 8. Question 8, I think, has kind of also been dealt with, but I'll bring it up again. What are the key priorities for the next 5 to 10 years? So obviously, again, I've heard a lot of comments with respect to the woodlands, the drains, renaturalization, sustainability. Is there anything else that you want to bring up?
I think that we need to start we need to start a parks and recreation, or call it whatever you want, but I think that would be a priority for the next 5 to 10 years, is establishing funds and a committee that's devoted to it.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy, I think one thing we are doing, and certainly is to me is a priority, and that is the, we're moving toward electric vehicles. I know Central Elgin are hoping within 5 years to have, that staff's objective, and we're electrifying, we're putting in the charging stations, and those are going in around. So I think, continuing to do that, to wean ourselves off fossil fuels, is important.
Okay. Great. Okay. Question 9, are there any sections or provisions contained within the provincial policy statement or the Planning Act that you would like to discuss specifically, or any other components? I know there's the PPS, especially the wording with respect to significant features and no development within or adjacent to. That's been a consistent policy directive for many years now. So, and there hasn't been any change based on the new 2020 provincial policy statement. So it continues to be a protection consideration. Is there anything else that you wanted to bring up?
I guess more of a question from my perspective with regards to the changes to the Conservation Act, with regards to the minister being able to override the Conservation Authority's decision. Has that been incorporated in the provincial policy statement, or is that separate?
It's through you, Mr. Chair, it is separate. It's the Planning Act allows for these minister zoning orders. I believe it's either through the legislation itself or there's regulations associated with the Planning Act. And so it basically says that the minister can be the final decision maker for, you know, a land use item. And so that's where that legislation, that teeth comes from, is from that. It's not in the provincial policy statement, I don't believe.
Okay, thank you.
I think there's more discussions going on regarding a lot of those changes to the CA Act. From what I understand, there's been a lot of pushback from the public on some of the things. So how many of the final amendments they're going to make, Mr. Chairman, I don't know whether they're going to go ahead or not. So.
Yeah, it's hard to tell since that committee that was formed is predominantly from the GTA. So this end of the province has been pretty much left out of it. So hard to say what'll happen.
Okay. All right. So if there's nothing else on that one, then the last point is, how can the County of Elgin work with you? So obviously we certainly have for your mandate and for your roles, staff work with the Environment Committee to provide information, but is there any other way that the County of Elgin can work with the Environment Committee?
Could implement studies and on the biodiversity of the existing areas. So although we have a natural heritage study, we have no studies on any of the provincially significant wetlands to verify if they're viable or not. Like I say, that was a vegetation report, and it doesn't dictate what it is. So to me, implementing resources and able to take on the climate change actions. So that's how I see the county is the resources in order to go forward, not as a non or as a the group of us. So, you know, this is great that we're getting things rolling, but we need help from the County of Elgin.
Okay. And anything else from anyone on that?
Well,
Okay.
I think from my perspective, just having the key players like yourself and Brian here for a conversation is a great help. It's a great start anyway.
I agree. I think it's awesome you guys came on board today.
Great. Okay. So I really appreciate that discussion. So that information will make its way into our issue scoping report, just so you're aware, and County Council will also get a chance to see these comments and through that report. Okay.
So number 10, I would state it like to dedicate resources to a global climate action plan. That's what the government is implementing right now, and it's been stressed. So to me, that would be it.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. So if there's nothing else on that, then I'll move on to the next slide.
Sure.
So from the last meeting, based on comments that were brought up at that meeting, I thought I'd go over a few points that I heard with respect to that, and we can kind of have a bit of a discussion on that. That first item, naturalization of drains and roadside management, I think Brian touched on and obviously dealt with for the most part.
Yep.
I had questions though with respect to, obviously there's no official plan policy about any of this at this time, but I'm aware that it can also be just done through practice, I think. or at least that's what I've heard. So certainly that's something that Brian had indicated he's going to be looking at. There's also the notion of if we did add policies to the official plan, who does it apply to? Are these lands owned by the county? Are they owned by the local municipality, or are they owned privately? Because that also affects the ability to do some of this naturalization. So I just wanted to, but we'll, that's something obviously that we'll need to explore with Brian as well. The second point I heard was the enhancement of corridors and linkages. So the Elgin Natural Heritage System Study, it didn't presume, there's actually a bit of a verbiage on that in the study. It didn't presume where the linkages could be done, mostly because at this time, 90% of those linkages occur in the agricultural area. So in areas that are currently farmed or are farmed. So if that's the case, then that in and of itself kind of provides that linkage. It's really the notion of providing linkages when there's development proposed nearby. So in the study, it talked about the need to identify those potential linkages when there's development applications. So through an environmental impact study, there would be some sort of mitigation or some sort of recommendations coming out of that could potentially be used for these corridor linkages consideration. But in order to be able to do an actual full-scale identify corridor linkages, it would have to be added as part of some sort of a study. And at this time, that hasn't been identified through our budgets or as part of that in Elgin Natural Heritage System study. So for now, our only resource or our only ability to really identify or these linkages would be through, like I said, if there was some sort of development proposed nearby, and then ultimately there would be some recommendations coming out of an environmental impact study.
I guess
So you know that Kettle Creek has definitely been working on linkages for quite a while, and so has Catfish. So.
Mm-hmm. So
I
are
guess,
those in, sorry, are those in, through you, Mr. Chair, are those in some sort of policy document, or are they coming up with some I guess, criteria or something to that effect? Do you know? Can I ask you, Sally, if that's Councillor Martin?
Yeah, I just know I worked with Elizabeth there at Kettle for a while up in the Dodds Creek area. They were doing it, and I know we have several properties like Tom Martin's property he was putting in, and it's basically through the Elgin Clean Water and through just working with our reforestation and naturalized people on each of our conservation authorities that are encouraging those things. But the like Alice is also encouraging that. But certainly Elgin Clean Water have done various corridor connections. And I know that Kettle a few years ago were really emphasizing the Dodds Creek area and for corridor connections.
Okay, great.
yeah, I guess I can add a bit. I hope to get Elizabeth or Betsy or somebody from Kettle Creek to come and be a delegation to this committee, maybe at the next meeting. If they're, I know Betsy, it's her busiest time of the season, so not likely to see Betsy, but possibly Elizabeth. But yeah, the linkages, Dodge Creek obviously is predominantly in Southold Township and runs into St. Thomas a little bit. But it is a concern because it is quite a large corridor for wildlife, and when we see a lot of these developments, they are on the edge of Dodge Creek, especially in the Talville area. And that's, when we see these setbacks from ravines, which is where all our developers are looking at right now on these edges. And where Rob talked about a little bit more of a buffer up there, and possibly whether it's some sort of wildflower plantings or naturalized areas that go back to our original flora and fauna were 150 years ago. That's something we need to really look at and just hopefully help out along these edges, because there's a lot of birds and animals that live along the edges of woodlots that if it's mowed right up to the edge or kept maybe not mowed, but just grass, it's not what they naturally would live in. But something we need to look at.
Another contact might be the Ministry of Natural Resources in the Elmer district. I know they've done quite a bit of mapping for natural linkages and that sort of thing. They don't always let you know what they're doing, but they have some information over there, I think, that might be helpful.
They have been changed over now, and now it's the MOECC is who taking care of that now. It's not even the Ministry of Natural Resources is more into conservation officers and that sort of thing, from what I can gather. Anyway, I was talking to a conservation officer. He says no, they've changed over totally. They've got nothing to do with the species at risk or any of that sort of stuff anymore. It's all gone over to MOECC.
Okay, great. So the next point that I think was mentioned at the meeting was the implementation of the climate change action plan. So as you know, the provincial policy statement 2020 now has local municipalities are required to make climate change mitigation and adaptation mandatory in their official plans. What I'm really interested in, though, at this point is seeing if there's been any other municipalities or counties that have adopted policy and what that looks like. Because general statements, I mean, you can include them in the official plan, but it's really need to be able to provide some sort of qualitative way of applying these types of statements. So if there's any examples out there, for instance, by all means, send them my way in actual official plan documents that we can look at and see if that kind of wording lends itself to our county as well. Okay. The enhanced education, always always a component that I think is very important for any municipality or county. Education is obviously key for residents to understand their impacts in their own stewardship, especially considering, like I said, most of these features are under private ownership. So certainly we rely on our local landowners to protect and preserve these features, and any opportunities we have for stewardship is key. So I'm not sure if there's any programs out there. I know there's lots of environmental groups potentially that are operating that I'm sure have a stewardship or education components. The Conservation Authority certainly have a component as well as part of their mandate. Is there anything else that you would like me to be aware of from an enhanced education perspective?
I think a lot of the groups like Alice and Elgin Clean Water, the conservation authorities, all try and do their best, but maybe it's something we need to put into our official plan and promote to the lower tier or the municipal partners that they adopt as well. Is that, like Rob spoke about, the 5% park plan. Maybe a percentage of that needs to be put back into demonstration plots or educational, a portion be educational for walking trails or whatever, for people to understand what the national environment should look like, not just a playground.
Certainly, trails is one thing that we have as Central Elgin. We've been working on a lot of trails through naturalized areas to help encourage people to get out into nature, and a lot of those are now going in, like in Port Stanley, near these new subdivisions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Does through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Martin, does Central Elgin have a Parks and Recreation Trails master plan that they utilize for
Yes,
ensuring these key functions are obtained through various development applications?
Yeah, we do have a master trails or a master plan for trails, and yeah, we do.
Okay. Okay. Great. So in the one other thing that I heard was the studies on the features themselves. So obviously through the Elgin Natural Heritage Systems study, there was the overall study of those features and functions and defining what those actual features are and better refining the features themselves. But at this time, there's been nothing identified in terms of doing additional studies to determine significance, for instance. We really rely on the process of, at this time, most of these features, like I said, are in the agricultural areas, so they remain as is. And if there's any development proposed adjacent to or within, then certainly that's where the environmental impact study would come in, and that would help to define the feature, the significance of that feature. What are the components within the natural heritage feature? But we very much do rely on landowner support in order to have these studies completed. So that's how we generally rely on, because obviously if we had to do studies, actual going out and doing studies on each of these features, it would be a massive undertaking, and there would also be the problematic, because a lot of these are under private ownership, you'd have to get the okay from the landowners, that sort of thing. So, and is there anything else that I missed from the last meeting? I admittedly I wasn't there. Obviously, I only was able to go through the video itself. But was there anything else that you wanted to bring up or at the time? At this time? No.
I can't think of anything. I think you've done a good job covering that.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So-
So sorry. Go ahead.
There's one area that we have in Elgin County that is, it's fragile. Like there's a report coming through from an ecologist on the floral of Elgin County, and like we talked about the rail lines and trying to get a corridor to go between Talbotville and the Elgin hiking trail. There's two sets of rail lines there. I don't know whether they're in progress or whether they could be turned into walking trails, but that Talbotville subdivision goes right. They would both take them directly to the Elgin hiking trail. And those areas, some of these areas are up for grabs right now, as far as I know. And I think that somehow when you get a particular area that is that fragile and that elusive in our county, that somehow we have to take and get after this to help it out. And I think that bridging the gap between universities and our studies that we need done is the key. You can get students right now. I think students are 100% paid for by the government this summer. So if we can utilize that mechanism of working with the universities to be able to get our studies done, and yes, we'd have to make provisions to get a hold of some of the landowners and to do the studies, but most of them, from what I've talked to, are very happy to understand exactly what is on their property. So I see that as being a bridge that we can overcome.
Okay. Okay, just making a note here.
Like we have some plants that are extremely rare, like the only ones in Ontario that are here, and it's wilting away because there's nobody looking after it, and it sits there. And if we as an organization don't take care of that, it's going to be gone. Like I can tell you that right now. I'm at that property several times throughout the years and monitoring it, but you can pick up the study, or I could even send you guys the study, the floral of Elgin County, and you'll see all the species at risk that are here and where they're documented. And he's just about finished with that as a document to present. It's in its draft forms right now. So when we get into things that are very, there's got to be a mechanism there to be able to get a hold of those areas and to help them out, or they're gone and we won't have them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because of overgrowth and of other avenues that are happening, and they're so segregated right now that they can't transfer. So there's certain areas here that are gems, but they're few and far between.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. So this is the next slide, the last slide. Next steps, in terms of next steps for the OP review. Obviously, we'll take the comments that I received from the Environment Committee on the current official plan, and we'll summarize in an issues report that will go to County Council. As individual members, as citizens of Elgin County, you can also comment individually, and we have our website up, elgincounty.ca/official plan review. We also have an email if you want to provide comments in that way on an individual basis. We also have a survey that's up on our webpage. It takes about 20 minutes to complete, and it has a lot of different questions with respect to priorities in the official plan review, and we encourage you to fill that out if you haven't already. You can also call and leave comments with that way, or mail in comments as well. And the deadline for that is April 15th, so we can sort of summarize something to County Council. We also have these what we heard reports that we'll be producing on a regular basis, which is what we heard through these various stakeholder consultations or public consultation. And as I mentioned, the issue scoping that will identify some of the key areas of interest with this official plan review. And the Elgin Natural Heritage Study, as you may know, it has not formally been adopted as part of the official plan for the county. So one of the things we'll be doing is through this process, we'll be ensuring that the information is available. We'll be setting up a web page, I think, specific to that. And we'll be soliciting comments from the public and eventually hosting an public meeting on the draft Elgin Natural Heritage System Study for comment and feedback. With the view of eventually, hopefully, adopting this as part of the official plan review process. And that's all I have. Is there anything else? Thank you. I really appreciate having me at the committee today and allowing me to speak on this.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day, Nancy. We appreciate it. And Brian as well.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. We have nothing for correspondence, so all we have left is to set the date for our next meeting. And hopefully I'll be able to land possibly Elizabeth Van Orn from Kettle Creek or one of the conservation authorities anyway to speak to us. Because we have 3 to choose from for Elgin County, or actually 4, I believe. We'll find one. If not, we'll go back to Kim since he might know what he's talking about. Okay, next date. Catherine, do you have
the last thank you, Mr. Chair. The last meeting, or sorry, Wednesday of April is the 28th at 10 a.m.
So 28th. Does that work for everybody?
Works fine for me.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll make it April 28th. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Very cool.
Somebody put their hand up.
I'll move.
Sally, Rob, all in favor? Everybody's got their hand up, carried.
Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. Great discussion.
All right.
See you on the 28th.
Thanks, Grant.